Welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe, and welcome to this little part of Dartmoor in Devon in the southwest of England. My name is Lisa Schneidau. I've got some stories for you about nature and about the springtime. And we may well be joined, as I'm telling, by some of the birds up in the tree here that are singing, and singing all around, and there's even the sound of the cuckoo calling down in the valley. And the first story I've got for you is a story about the very beginning of things. Now, there's many creation stories from all over the world, but the beginning of this one you may have heard before. This story says that God created the world in 6 days. And on the 7th day, quite reasonably, he rested. And he rested in a place that was more beautiful than any other he'd created. The Garden of Eden. And as God stood in the Garden of Eden and looked all around him, he was pleased. There were pomegranate trees dripping with red-pink fruits. There were birds flying in the sky, singing about the joy of creation itself. There was the scent of orange blossom filling the air. It was a good place to be. But then God looked down, and there was a creature that he wasn't quite so pleased with. Whether it was the strange little wispy goatee beard that was already starting to form on the creature's chin, whether it was the cloven hooves at the end of his legs instead of feet that looked a bit strange, whether it was the dark, malcontent heart that God could already see, God looked at the creature that would become Beelzebub, the devil himself, and he said, "Out! You do not belong in the Garden of Eden. You've got the rest of the world to play in. Go on, out!" The devil, he found himself guddling in the dust and the dirt outside of the pearly gates of the Garden of Eden. And the gates closed behind him with a satisfied click. Now, they do say there's a bit of a devil in all of us. And they do say that when you're told you can't have something, or you're not allowed to go somewhere, that is the place you want to go to more than anything else in the world. And so it was for the devil. The devil wanted to get back into the Garden of Eden more than anything. Why shouldn't he? He was a creature of creation as well. And so he went to talk to some of the other creatures that had recently been made. And he asked every one of them the same question. Can you get me back in? Can you get me a free ticket to the Garden of Eden? Can you carry me on your back? Can you fly me in on your great wings? And whether it was the fox, or the horse, or the eagle, or the butterfly that he asked, every single one of those creatures looked at the devil and thought, there's something a bit strange here. And every single one of those creatures said, no. No, you're all right, thanks, no. Until the devil came to a strange creature, a creature without any legs, but with scaly, dry skin, and the creature was slithering along the ground, and then it looked up, and with its beady black eyes it looked the devil straight in the eye. And the devil said, "Aha! You are an intelligent, discerning kind of creature. I have a deal for you. Let's say you manage to get me back into the Garden of Eden. Well, if you do that, I will make sure that you have the sweetest flesh on earth there is to eat, and that you have that for all eternity. What do you say?" And the snake considered. What is the sweetest flesh on earth there is to eat?" said the snake. "Oh, everyone knows that," said the devil. "The sweetest flesh on earth there is to eat is the flesh of Adam and the sons of Adam, and the flesh of Eve and the daughters of Eve." Said the snake. "Yes, "Yes, I'd like to try that. I don't see why I can't get you into the Garden of Eden." And quick as a flash, the devil changed himself into a tiny, tiny devil. And he hid behind one of the fangs inside the snake's mouth. And the two of them travelled then. The devil inside the snake's mouth and the snake slithering along the ground and through the grass and through the dirt and up to the gates of the Garden of Eden and easily underneath those gates. And they were in. And the snake looked around. There was lush green grass. There were flowers all around him. And he thought, I could stay here. I could get used to this. And they carried on travelling. And they travelled right up until they got to a clearing. And if you know anything about stories, you will know that things happen in clearings. And there were two things in this clearing. One was a tree, a stout, quite small tree, but weighed down on every bough and branch with heavy, fragrant, beautiful fruit, green-red fruit. And standing next to the tree, there was a woman, the first woman. Her name was Eve, and she was wearing nothing more than her birthday suit. Well, we all know what happened next, don't we? The snake slithered up and poked its head up out of the grass and looked at Eve and said, "Hey, why don't you try that fruit? It looks really nice. I mean, I couldn't reach it, but you could." "No," said Eve. "No. God has told us that we are not allowed to eat the fruit of that tree. That's the only fruit we can't eat." "Ah," said the snake. "Spoil sport, isn't he? Well, I don't know. I wouldn't tell. If you just wanted to take a bite, nobody would notice, I'm sure." And Eve reached up and took one of the apples from the tree of knowledge. And it smelt really good. And she tried it. She took a bite and she gained that knowledge. And with the knowledge, she gave the apple to Adam. Adam took a bite and Adam gained that knowledge. Now, you may well know that story, but what you didn't know is that it wasn't the snake talking at all. It was the devil talking out from behind the fangs of the snake. And it wasn't long after that along came God. And God took one look at Adam and Eve and the snake and the devil and he sighed a very big sigh. "Go on, all of you," he said. "Out. You do not belong in the Garden of Eden anymore. Out." And Adam and Eve and the snake and the devil, well, they all found themselves guddling in the dust and the dirt outside of the gates of the Garden of Eden that closed with a click behind them. Well, Adam and Eve, they went off in one direction to go and make a life for themselves. The devil, he went off in another direction. He'd realised that actually the thing he enjoyed more than anything was causing trouble for people. But the snake, there on his belly in the dust, the snake thought, hang on a minute, I was meant to have a reward out of this. The devil said that I could have the sweetest flesh on earth there was to eat. And I did my part of the bargain. Maybe I need to go and find it for myself. And so the snake slithered off along the ground in the same direction that Adam and Eve had gone. And he was travelling for some time when a little voice came out of the sky above him. And the snake looked up, and it was a little bird. It was a bird with glossy blue-black feathers on its back, a great tail, a white front and a little red bib, and a chattering noise when its beak opened and it started to talk. This was the swallow. And the swallow looked at the snake and said, "Hey, where are you going?" "Wouldn't you like to know?" said the snake. "I'm going to get my reward. I'm going to get the sweetest flesh on earth there is to eat, which of course, as everyone knows, is the flesh of Adam and the flesh of Eve. Who told you that? Said the swallow. Well, said the snake, the devil, of course. The devil! Don't you know anything? Said the swallow. I know it's early days yet, but everybody knows the devil is the biggest liar of the lot. You don't want to believe a thing the devil says. And for the first time in his short life, the snake doubted himself. I tell you what, said the swallow, I know there's a solution to this. The solution is to get an expert opinion. I think we should do the first ever scientific experiment. I think we should send out somebody who understands these things to go and try the flesh of every single creature on earth. That is the only way we will find out just what is the sweetest flesh on earth to eat. What do you say? The snake was a logical creature. The snake couldn't find anything wrong with the swallow's proposal. All right, he said. I will wait. Good, said the swallow. And we will get an assembly of all the animals and birds and all the creatures together to hear the answer. For I know exactly who we should send out to do this experiment. I think we should send the mosquito. The mosquito is very efficient at drinking blood, and so the mosquito can be the one who does the testing. And so the mosquito flew up into the air and started its journey around the globe and sampled the blood of every single type of living creature there was. It took nearly a year to do that work. And by the time the mosquito was flying back in towards the assembled group of all of the animals and birds and creatures waiting for the answer, the mosquito was quite a lot heavier than when it had left. And it was flying quite a lot more slowly. But the swallow fluttered up to meet the mosquito. And the swallow said, Hey, I can't wait for the answer. Tell me, what is the sweetest flesh on earth there is to eat? Well, said the mosquito, I have to tell you, the sweetest flesh on earth there is to eat is undoubtedly the flesh of Adam and the sons of Adam, and the flesh of Eve and the daughters of Eve. The devil was telling the truth. I'm sorry, said the swallow. I didn't quite hear that. Could you fly a little bit closer, please? I said. But the mosquito didn't get any further. For as it flew closer to the swallow flew up to meet it, and with its tiny little sharp beak, it snipped out the tongue of the mosquito. And so the mosquito could make no more words. After that, the only sound the mosquito could make was and when the mosquito flew down to all of the assembled company of creatures, they all looked at one another. I can't understand. I can't. What's he saying? And then the swallow arrived. And the swallow perched on a creeper above the assembled company, and the swallow said, My friends, you will know what a good friend I am with the mosquito. Well, yes, they said. Because wherever there's a mosquito, there's usually a swallow not far behind. Precisely, said the swallow. Now, before the mosquito had an unfortunate accident, the mosquito told me the answer to the question. The sweetest flesh on earth there is to eat, the mosquito said, is undoubtedly the frog. And there was a murbling and a burbling and a chattering. Everyone was quite surprised. The frog? Well, who'd have thought it? The frog was a little upset. But the snake realized that it had been tricked. And the snake looked up into the air to where the swallow was fluttering and laughing above him. And the snake leapt up, and with one bite, it caught hold of the swallow's tail, and it bit a huge chunk out of the tail of the swallow. So this is the story of why swallows have such deeply forked tails. This is the story of why snakes eat frogs. This is also the story of why mosquitoes make such a funny noise, and why mosquitoes do the best job they can of being annoying to human beings, because they know the truth. But it's also the story of the swallow, and why swallows and people are such good friends, and why in the springtime, when we can hear again the chatter of the swallows up into the air, and we realise that the swallows have arrived back here, all the way from Africa, that is why we get a little leap of joy in our hearts. This is a blackthorn tree. A blackthorn is one of the fairy trees. It's quite a witchy tree. You don't really mess with blackthorn. And on Dartmoor here about 2 weeks ago, blackthorn all over the moor was a mass of white blossom. It was absolutely beautiful. The insects loved it. But they do say that when there's that much blackthorn blossom, it's a blackthorn spring, which means that even though spring is on its way, we're still in for a really cold snap and really harsh weather. And fingers crossed that hasn't happened on Dartmoor yet this year, and fingers crossed it won't. But I have an old story from Oxfordshire for you about a blackthorn tree. And it concerns a farmer. And everyone around said, "Oh, that farmer, that one, he's no good. He's only in it for himself and the money. He doesn't care about the land." And this farmer's blackthorn tree was standing right in the middle of one of his best fields. And it was quite a big tree for its kind. And in the springtime it was a mass of blossom. And all the birds flocked to that tree, and in the autumn everybody went to the tree to pick the little blue-black fruits, the sloes, from the tree. But for the farmer it was nothing but a nuisance. It got in his way. Everything he tried to do with that field, there was the tree. And one day in high springtime, the farmer called all of his workers to him, and he said, "Right, today's the day. That tree is coming down. Who's going to do it for me?" And there was silence. Not one of those workers piped up. Not one of them was willing to cut the tree. "That's a fairy tree," they said. "You don't touch that. That's got gold underneath the roots. That's got fairies around it. That protects the farm. I'm not cutting that down." "Fairies," said the farmer. "You really believe in fairy tales? Load of old rubbish. Well, if you want to do something well, you have to do it yourself, don't you?" And the farmer took his axe, and he walked up to that tree, and he started to chop. And he chopped. And that blackthorn, with all of its spikes, gave him as bad a time as it possibly could. But the axe was stronger. It wasn't too long before that beautiful blackthorn tree was lying severed on the ground. And the farmer looked around him. And he got a spade. And he started to dig under the roots of the tree. He thought, "I'll just check. I'll just see if there's any fairy gold there. I'll just see if the stories are true." And underneath the roots, there wasn't fairy gold. There was nothing but a pile of old brown crumpled leaves. "Ha! Load of old rubbish," said the farmer. "Fairies." And he turned with his axe and he walked back up the hill towards the farm, leaving the tree severed on the ground behind him. And when he got to the brow of the hill and he looked out towards his farm, well, where the farm used to be was nothing more than a smoking pile of black ash, because the farm had burned right to the ground. And as he looked, there was a little voice behind him, a little cackle of a voice that seemed to come almost from the ground itself. And the voice said, "Load of old rubbish." This is the willow tree on our allotment, and our allotment's really quite far gone in places. But willow is an interesting thing, because willow used to be made into baskets all over the world. It was a massive industry before plastic was invented. And I'm yet to try to cut some of this later in the season and to make something out of it myself. There's an old willow story, which is a gypsy story, and it tells of an old basket maker. And the basket maker used to travel and sell his baskets from door to door. And he used to just sit around on the roadside and make baskets. And he had for his companion an old donkey. And he and the old donkey had been together for longer than probably either of them could remember. They were very, very good friends. And he would sit there and weave his baskets, and the donkey would just be a donkey, really, and graze nearby. But one morning, the basket maker was busy at his work, but the donkey was not a happy donkey. The donkey just made lots of fuss. It kept braying and it kept bothering him, and it couldn't settle, and it made so much fuss and so much hassle that the basket maker eventually put his basket down and he said, "That's that. I'm going to teach you a lesson." And he took a switch and he hit that donkey so hard to teach it a lesson. Well, he hit it so hard that he cut that poor donkey clean in two. And he looked at what he'd done, and the tears welled up in his eyes, and he thought, I've got to do something. I can't leave it like this. And so he did the only thing he knew. He got a load of willow withes and he bound them all together, and he started weaving them together, and he started weaving the two parts of the donkey back together again, until he'd made as good a job of it as he could with the willow, and he got loads of mud and he daubed all of those patches in between with mud to try to make the donkey whole again. Well, I'm glad to say that donkey survived. That donkey healed. The two halves of the donkey came back together, and the donkey was right as rain again after a while. But even better, the willow that had bound the donkey together also stayed as part of the donkey. And if you know anything about willow, you'll know that if you put a stake of willow in the ground, it will start to grow again. And that's exactly what it did with the donkey. So not only did the basket maker have a donkey as a companion, he had a walking, braying, grazing supply of willow withes for his basket making. And both of them lived together even more happily after that. So this is my favourite spot on Natterden Hill, just above Chagford, and we've got some willow warblers and chiffchaffs here who might be joining us in the story a little bit. I've got a story for you about hares, and the hare is a really important animal on Dartmoor, as well as being a really ancient symbol of springtime, because the hare is in the symbol of the tinners. There's a funny little round symbol that you find all over Dartmoor in churches and everywhere, which is three hares running in a circle. And each of the hares has two ears, but they only have 3 ears between them. And that was the symbol of the tinning industry, and that used to be a very big industry on Dartmoor in the old days. And the hare is a shapeshifter, a mystical animal, pops up all over different stories, but this particular story is from Dartmoor. It comes from the southeast of the moor, in a place near to Bovey Tracy called Heathfield. And Heathfield used to be covered in heath, funnily enough, and you can still find nature reserves there where you can see the heather and the gorse and the old heath habitat. It's quite special stuff, really. But this story comes from several centuries ago, and it concerns an old woman. She lived in a little cottage on the edge of Heathfield, on the edge of the heath, and she had a strange thing happen. She woke up in the middle of the night one night, and for some reason she was convinced it was daytime. Whether she'd had one of those weird dreams where you wake up and everything is a bit odd, or whether the moon was shining so bright in the sky that she thought it was the sun, I don't know what it was, but nevertheless, she got up, she went downstairs, she put on her clothes, she got a cup of tea, she put her cloak on, she put her hood over her hair, and she went out to saddle up her little pony and set off for the market across the heath. And she hadn't been riding along very long when a strange shape was heading towards her, really with some speed, and as it got closer she could see the figure, the two ears. She could see the shape of the brown hair. And as that hair got closer to the old woman and her pony, the hair flipped up into the air and it just landed on a hedge bank that the old woman happened to be riding past. And the hare turned and looked at the old woman with such pleading eyes that she said to it, "You know what, my hearty? You're coming with me." And she picked the hare up by its two ears, opened the pannier on the side of her pony and dropped the brown hare straight in. And not a moment too soon, because coming towards the old woman and her pony now, there was the sound of horses' hooves, there was a great dark figure on a horse, and there was the sound of baying hounds. And as this dark figure got closer to her, she knew something was horribly wrong. He got closer still, and she could see, just by the moonlight, two little horns showing from just beneath the figure's hat. And she knew exactly who this was. This was our friend the devil. He is called Dewer on Dartmoor. He hangs around the moor with his wished hounds, and they cause trouble for anybody who is stupid enough to go out on the moor on their own at night. And sure enough, as the figure came closer, the sound of baying hounds also came closer, and the two of them were surrounded by creatures with piercing red eyes and flaming blue tails, and the steaming breath of the hounds rising up into the air as they yelped and whimpered and slavered. And the devil looked straight at the old woman and said, "Madam, have you seen our quarry? Have you seen a brown hare come this way at all? Think very carefully." The old woman was having none of it. But in order to get out of this situation, she had to do something she didn't do very often. She had to lie. "Well, no, sir. I've seen nothing of the kind. Now go on, be off with you." Dewer sniffed a couple of times, as if he didn't quite believe her. But she had a steely look in her eye, and there was nothing he could do. So he went on his way. And he and the hounds rode off into the distance, leaving the faint whiff of sulphur hanging around the heath. The old woman thought, "I'd better get out of here. I'd better get myself to market. It's safe at market. There's other people around. I'll be all right there." And she geed up her little pony, but the pony would not budge. The little pony was going nowhere. And the pannier lid flipped open, and out of that pannier from the side of the horse came not a brown hare, but a young woman, all dressed in white, and she stood before the pony and the old woman, and she said, "Thank you. You've saved me. I was under a great enchantment. I did some wrong 10 years ago. I was changed into a brown hare, and I was destined to forever be chased by Dewer and his hounds across the moor. The only thing that could save me was what you have done this evening. You got between me and Dewer, and I thank you for it." "Oh, well," said the old woman, "it was nothing. I was here anyway." "I shall give you a gift," said the young woman. "I shall give you the gift of luck. You'll find when you go home that your hens all lay 2 eggs for every one they would have laid before. You'll find your cows give much better milk, and they give good milk all year round. And your husband, you will find him more agreeable than he has ever been. He will agree with everything you say. You will always win an argument." Said the old woman. "We'll see about that." But everything the young woman said came true. There were more eggs. There was more good milk all year round. And her husband, well, it was weird. He agreed with everything she said. She was always right. Things were a little more peaceful in the house after that. But there was one more thing the young girl had said. She said, "Beware of Dewar. Beware of the devil, because he can change himself into any form he likes. Whether it be man or woman or beast, the only two things that Dewar cannot change himself into are a dove or a lamb. But they do say that Dewar, the devil, really enjoys politics. So just you watch out for him there." So, that is the end of my stories for today. And thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed them. And thank you to the World Storytelling Cafe for inviting me to do this and for providing so many stories for everybody as we find ourselves in this very strange lockdown situation. I hope you all stay well and happy and healthy and have a very good weekend.
Did you enjoy that, storyteller? Of course you did. And if you enjoyed it, like the minstrels of old, we're passing round the hat. And if you have some, whether it's paper or coin, our storytellers would appreciate what you put in. Every penny you put in goes directly to that storyteller through PayPal. All you have to do is go to worldstorytellingcafe.com, click on today's stories or click on that storyteller, and there'll be a hat below the story, and you can just drop a little in that hat. Well, thank you for listening. And if you can afford it, we'd appreciate it.